All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Hawk After Dark. I read a lot, and I read 3 articles this week that I think just work very well together in kind of a series, and that's what we're going to discuss today. The titles of those articles are How Stupidity is an Existential Threat to America. It's a good article. The second article, We're Watching the Largest and Most Dangerous Cult in American History, referring to the MAGA movement. And third, the MAGA internet calls for war. Stupidity, cult, violence. I mean, is there a better distillation of the right today than those 3 things? You get dumb and gullible, loud and mean, easily manipulated, easily separated from their own money. You add their rage and their incredible desire for political violence. And we're seeing all of these things escalate dramatically over recent days. I'm recording this on Saturday, June 1st, since the day before yesterday when Donald Trump was convicted unanimously by a jury that his attorneys approved of and participated in the selection of. In a Manhattan courtroom, they convicted him unanimously of 34 felony counts in an election interference case. And so let's dive in. How Stupidity is an Existential Threat to America. This article was written by a guy named Bobby Azarian, and I think it's the first time I've ever read anything by him. Good writer. There is no fat in this article at all, and his wordsmithing is top-notch. It may sound like an insensitive statement, but the cold, hard truth is that there are a lot of stupid people in the world, and their stupidity presents a constant danger to others. Just keep MAGA in your head as I read through this article. Some of those people are in power. I mean, here's the thing. In the United States, elected Republicans, we do have a few people who I think are incredibly stupid and actually believe their own bullshit. The Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Lauren Boeberts, people like that. I think the far greater threat is elected Republicans, all of whom are very enthusiastically coming to Donald Trump's defense in the wake of these verdicts, that are smart enough to know better. Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Marco Rubio, Mike Lee, all of those are senators. Those guys are very much smart enough to know better. And they know that what they're saying is bullshit, but they're saying it anyway because they want to stay in power. They want to maintain, it's a self-preservation, placing one's self-preservation ahead of the good of the country. And that to me is just really cynical and really dangerous and just shitty. It's just shitty. They know that they are lying to the American people. And the danger of that we're seeing right now is that, Trump and these elected Republicans and his base have made the denigration and the destruction of our justice system. That's now a platform. That's a platform of the Republican Party. That's part of the Republican Party's platform. And same thing with regard to law enforcement when it goes after Republicans, which is why they all want to do away with the FBI. They all know better, except for those stupid ones that I listed at the beginning. Every single person on Fox News, every single primetime host on Fox News knows that what they say is bullshit. They know it. Except for Sean Hannity, they're all educated people. Sean Hannity didn't graduate community college. But what are you going to do? He's got more money than I do, so whatever. Um, but a far greater number of these people do not have positions of power, but they still have the power to vote. And they're going to fucking vote this November. They're going to vote. And we need to beat Donald Trump over multiple states by a margin of like 15 million votes. That's the only way. That's the only way. You know, I guess I would say that two people who I think are incredibly educated and do believe their own bullshit would be Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito on the United States Supreme Court. But I think for them, that's more of a function of ego and superiority, overconfidence, entitlement, arrogance. They just can't, those guys can't function with other people questioning them and questioning their position. Their brains have just been completely rotted by their position. You know, they're on this. They're members of an entity called the Supreme Court. Of course, they feel that way about themselves. They think that they have an infallibility about them, that they get offended when anyone questions their judgment, their motives, their decisions, their opinions, their outcomes. It's like, how dare you? And, you know, so I don't think it's a question of pure stupidity with them, but it's just fucking arrogance, man. It's just arrogance. We may have heard of a concept called collective intelligence, but there is also a concept called collective stupidity. And it is a force with equal influence in the world. This is a bomb quote. We're still in the first paragraph. It would not be a stretch to say that at this point in time, stupidity presents an existential threat to America because in many circles, it is being celebrated. And yeah. And, you know, one thing that I appreciate is in the second paragraph of this article, this guy's, you know, like, simmer down for just a second. Stupidity may seem derogatory or insulting. It is actually a scientific concept that refers to a specific type of cognitive failure. Stupidity is not simply a lack of intelligence, but rather a failure to use one's own cognitive abilities effectively. By becoming aware of the limitations of our natural intelligence or our own ignorance, which is simply meaning we don't know something about something. That's the difference between stupidity and ignorance. I'm ignorant of how to perform open heart surgery. I am ignorant of how to repair a Ferrari. That doesn't make me stupid. It makes me self-aware enough to know and to admit to myself and to others that there are things in this world that I don't know enough about to be effective at those things. There are things that I don't know. There are things that I don't understand. Acknowledging that it's not a weakness. It doesn't make me less of a person or less of a man. It's just simply dealing with reality. By becoming aware of the limitations of our natural intelligence or our own ignorance, we can adjust our reasoning, behavior, and decision making to account for our own intellectual shortcomings. But that requires that you be aware enough and self-aware enough to know that there are things that you don't know, and to be able to, I don't know, have a level of self-confidence, I guess, to be able to admit that to yourself and to others. I don't know how to do that thing. I don't know how to play concert piano. I wish I did. That'd be great. My parents signed me up for piano lessons when I was 6 years old. I hated it. I wanted a drum. And no drum, piano. It's like, fuck. And so I started faking stomach aches so I could get out of my piano lessons. And they're like, okay, the kid doesn't want to play piano. At 56 years old, I wish that I'd stuck with that. I wish that I had stuck with the piano for the last 50 years, in addition to the other things that I went on to do as far as drums and guitar. It would have formed such an incredible foundation for music reading and music theory for me that I've never had. Um, when I first started college in the fall of 1986 at a small private college in Central Ohio, I was like, I'd already been playing in bands for years as a drummer. And I was like, yeah, this is cool. I'll go be a music major. And the first day of class in a music class, they were doing intervals on the pianos, thirds, fifths, sevenths, that kind of thing. I didn't even know what those were. I didn't know what the notes on the piano was. I still had all the hair. And at one point, the instructor looked at me and he was like, my God, what are you, a drummer? And I was like, yeah, I am. And by the end of the second week, I withdrew from all the music classes that I'd signed up for because I didn't have that foundation. I didn't know how to read music. I didn't know the notes. I was ignorant of all of those things. And trying to pretend that I wasn't was not going to be successful in an academic setting where I was going to be graded. That was a hard thing to admit. Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm a drummer. I've been playing in drums for years, but in this context, I'm not a musician at all. And I didn't have a choice but to admit that back then. But that brings us to people who do have a choice to be self-aware of their own ignorance and be self-aware of the things that they don't know, that they're not actually an expert in, but refuse to admit it. Stupidity is a consequence of failure to be aware of one's own limitations. And this type of cognitive failure has a scientific name. Say it with me. The Dunning-Kruger effect. That's right. Yes, the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a well-known psychological phenomenon that describes the tendency for individuals to overestimate their level of intelligence, knowledge, or competence in a particular area. In other words, they are ignorant of their own ignorance. It's easy to think of examples in which failing to recognize one's own ignorance can become dangerous. Take, for example, people with no medical training try to provide medical advice. Where have we heard that before? Where have we heard that before? Vaccines don't work. COVID's a hoax. Masks don't work. A lot of these people truly believe that they have a superior understanding of health and physiology as opposed to people who have an education or a degree or multiple advanced degrees in those areas. There are many people who trust these self-proclaimed experts, and there is no doubt that some have paid for their lives with it. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. And when you put that into a political context, people are attracted to confident leaders. And so politicians are incentivized to be overconfident in their own beliefs and opinions and to overstate their own expertise. And who has done that more than Donald Trump? Nobody. He's an expert at everything. He knows more than the experts on everything. The experts usually have effective, valid, reasonable information and advice to offer, and he brushes them away because he knows better. He knows more than his generals. He was very famous for saying that. So it's like we get Donald Trump, we get Marjorie Taylor Greene, we get Lauren Boebert, we get Matt Gaetz, we get Paul Gosar, Jim Jordan, and these people are being celebrated for their overconfidence, which is their stupidity. It's their Dunning-Kruger. And it just becomes a self-perpetuating thing. It's like The Republican Party base now, the MAGA base, consists entirely of people who suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect about literally everything. And so they vote for people who reflect that. And it incentivizes politicians to engage in that kind of dipshittery even more. And there was a 2008 study of over 2,000 Americans in an attempt to see whether or not the effect, Dunning-Kruger effect, was playing a role in one's ability to overestimate their political knowledge. The results clearly showed that the people who scored the lowest on political knowledge were the very same people who were the most likely to overestimate their performance in that area. It makes perfect sense. The less we know about something, the less of an ability we have to assess how much we don't know. I agree with that a little bit. But I mean, how, and this was always something that just dumbfounded me during COVID, man. I mean, it's like, how hard is it to admit that doctors know more than you about medicine? How hard is it to admit that immunologists know more about viruses and vaccines than you do with your GED, Jethro, and your 27 teeth? I didn't understand that at the time. I didn't understand it at all. You know, all of these Gomer chuckleheads that I was seeing on TikTok screaming about oppression. But we'll get to that in our third article, because it turns out that was really important during 2020. I'm going to skip a couple of these. We're all victims of Dunning-Kruger to a certain degree, some more than others. But what can we do? We can instill a higher awareness in others, a goal of gaining a deeper awareness of our own cognitive limitations and limited knowledge base. And when we run into people who suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect, we must teach them to be aware of their own ignorance and give them the skills that they need to search for more knowledge and to detect when they or others are overestimating their own knowledge or competency. Good luck with that. Okay, article number 2. We're watching the largest and most dangerous cult in American history. So this one opens up with a couple of little vignettes from cult scenarios. Quote, I was dying. It was just a matter of time. Lying behind the wheel of the airplane, bleeding out of the right side of my devastated body, I waited for the rapid shooting to stop. That's former California member of the House of Representatives, Jackie Spear, in her memoir, recounting the experience of being shot 5 times during an ambush during her fact-finding visit to Jonestown, Guyana, where Jim Jones and his cult, the People's Temple, had built a compound. Second, quote, combined with everything else was going on, it made it difficult to breathe. Being crushed by the shield and the people behind it, leaving me defenseless and injured. That's Metropolitan Police Officer Daniel Hodges describing being crushed in a doorway during the January 6th, 2021 attack by Trump supporters on the U.S. Capitol. Both of these reflect a person who was the victim of extreme violence perpetrated by the followers of a single person whose influence had spread to hundreds or thousands of people. In fact, Jackie Spears' experience with Jim Jones followers was part of the single greatest loss of American life, 918 people prior to 9/11. And we give these things the umbrella name of cult, and then we talk about brainwashing, which is a bit of an oversimplification. And one of the things I like about this article is it goes on to talk about a couple of studies that find that there's actually a kind of a voluntary self-surrender. The decision to give up control as part of the cult process may actually be part of the reason why people join. and people who are cult vulnerable may be experiencing some sense of confusion or separation from society, or seek the same sort of highly controlled environment that was part of their childhood. They can feel an enormous lack of control in the face of uncertainty, like economic, occupational, academic, social, familial, or feeling like, we're losing our country. America's changing. It's not the same America that I grew up in. And I want that. I want that same America from when I was a child. And these people can, do have a tendency to gravitate more towards a cult as their distress about these things increases. And that's Trumpism. That's MAGA. And another psychologist went on to talk about the concept of cognitive dissonance, in which there's a disconnect between one's feelings, belief, and convictions and their observable actions. The dissonance is distressing, and in order to relieve the anxiety, people may become more invested in the cult or belief system that actually goes against who they are or who they were individually before they join the cult. And starting in 2016, there were tons of Trump voters who previously had voted twice for Barack Obama, but felt that the country was changing, felt that economically it wasn't going in the right direction, and felt that Donald Trump was just going to mix things up. He was just going to go in there and flip over tables and shit. And that just grew and compounded on itself. And as such, cult members become more dug in and willing to cling to thoughts and beliefs that contradict all available observable evidence. In other words, they are no longer able to find any middle ground or compromise on pretty much anything. How accurate is that? Incredibly accurate. I mean, look at where we are now. I mean, it's like I remember when I was a kid, when I was in college, when I was a kid growing up until 1994, when Newt Gingrich took over with all of his incendiary language, our politicians disagreed with each other. We didn't have Fox News. We didn't have Alex Jones. We didn't have Newsmax or OAN. Donald Trump was still fighting his own personal civil war on the streets of Manhattan, trying to avoid STDs. Google that. He talked about that, or his own Vietnam, something like that. I don't remember what the exact quote is, but it's equally inane and dumb. And it's just like our politicians disagreed, and they'd get on Meet the Press on Sunday morning and argue with each other for 15 minutes. Then they'd go play golf together. All of that changed in 94 with Newt Gingrich. It got worse in 96 and beyond when Fox News went on the air. And it really came to a head in 2008 when our country elected Barack Obama, which enraged everybody in this country who looked like me and was incredibly racist. And it compounded even further when this country in 2012 had the audacity to re-elect him to a second term. And white America responded to 2 terms of Barack Obama by electing Donald Trump. It's like we had Bill Clinton, balanced budget, had a surplus. Conservatives got pissed off, so that we all elected a dipshit for president for 8 years, George W. Bush. Then we swung back to Obama for 8 years. White America, racist bullshit, got pissed off and elected an even bigger dipshit and an actual threat to democracy in Donald Trump. Fortunately, he only served 1 term. I don't believe he's going to be reelected to a second. But there's no middle ground on anything anymore. There's no room for compromise on anything anymore, because it's being painted as a struggle between good and evil. And on the Republican side, they are good. They are fighting a holy war against Democrats who are evil and of Satan. I mean, we're turning all their kids trans, right? and you see that in the base of the GOP, it has become an authoritarian, anti-democratic, theocratic political movement. It's a domestic terrorism movement that wants to overthrow anything that resembles democracy or democratic rule in the United States of America. They're very explicit about that. They just say it out loud now. A bunch of them said it out loud at the last CPAC convention. It's like everything is treasonous. And it's like Trump with COVID. I mean, he allowed tens of thousands of Americans to die unnecessarily because there was no middle ground on the right. COVID is a hoax. It's no worse than the flu. It's the same as the common cold. And tyranny, the tyranny of government shutdowns, and the tyranny of social distancing, and the tyranny of masks. And one of the things that really, really chapped the right during 2020 and 2021 was states and jurisdictions shutting down churches, because that was a direct attack on religion to a huge number of people in this country. And, which morphed into Democrats are going to make religion illegal in the United States. Never mind the fact that Donald Trump was still fucking president when this stuff was going on. And, it's like, they're already like, they're going to take our guns. Well, now they're going to take our God. And America was built on God, guns, and guts. And Democrats want to do away with two of those three things. And, and again, I mean, going back to that first article, it's like, now we have this conviction of Donald Trump on 34 felony counts a couple days ago, and there's no middle ground. Sorry, I got one eyebrow hair that's bothering me. I got to clean these up at some point. They're making me crazy. He gets convicted, and immediately, I didn't hear any elected Republicans say, no, we should be okay with this verdict. I saw one Republican candidate say that, and that's Larry Hogan from the state of Maryland, who's running for senator. He's a Republican. And in between the period of time where it was announced that they have a verdict and when the verdict was read, he said, look, we're the United States of, he put it out on Twitter, I think, we're the United States of America. We have a system of justice here, and we all need to respect this verdict, whatever it may be. And Trump's campaign co-chair, there are two people who are running his campaign, a guy named Chris Lasavitas and a woman from Florida named Susie Wiles. When Larry Hogan tweeted that, Chris Lasavita retweeted it with the comment, you just ended your campaign, because he wasn't being viewed as being sufficiently loyal to Donald Trump. The co-chair of Donald Trump's campaign, you just ended your campaign. You don't think other Republicans saw that? That was before the verdict was even announced. I mean, it's a mob family. The Republican Party right now is a fucking mob family. Nothing more. It's the Sopranos. And how many other Republicans came out and fell in line? And again, I kind of mocked the ending of that last article because I thought it was dumb and rose-colored lenses and too hopeful. And it's like, that's never going to work. Well, we get to the end of this article and we have exit strategies for people who are ensnared in a cult. One factor is accountability, or repeatedly seeing the adverse consequences of the group's behavior. For example, indictment, incarceration, job loss, which we started to see even more of this week. Yay, New York jury. But until one party and its ardent followers can admit that they are in a domestic terrorist cult, and as Eric Swalwell said, are unserious people, there is no hope of unification on the horizon. The first step is getting through to people who can't or won't see the truth. There's no fucking hope of that with these people. Zero. None. Zip. Nada. None. None. No hope at all for these chowderheads. Which brings us to our third article. The MAGA internet calls for war. They're all trying to dox the jurors now. They're all trying to find out the names, identities, addresses of the jurors from Donald Trump's criminal case because they explicitly want to make their lives a living hell. Extremist rhetoric online is often a foundation for action in the physical world, but not immediately. One thing I like about this article is it says it doesn't happen instantaneously. There's got to be kind of this permission structure built up for it. And there has to be kind of an almost like logistical foundation laid for mass violence to occur. And I mean, I'll give one of the most influential conservative voices on Twitter is somebody who goes by the Twitter handle Cat Turd. I'm not kidding. Cat Turd. After a jury found Donald Trump guilty of felony charges yesterday, Bronze Age pervert, the Twitter alter ego of edgelord influencer Kostan Alamiru, retweeted one of his own posts from March. It is a movie clip depicting a scene of armed men storming buildings and gunning down people. In the text accompanying the post, Bronze Age pervert jokes that the clip is real footage of a well-planned neutralization operation that will take place after Trump wins re-election this fall. Some extreme language has appeared all across the right-wing posting ecosystem. Proud Boys are back at it. Trump supporters are calling for violence against jurors and the judge, and also Judge Engoron from the civil case, and DA Bragg and AG Letitia James. A woman in Texas was arrested for threatening to kill Judge Tanya Chutkan, who's overseeing the January 6th case. Weirdly, Judge Eileen Cannon from Florida has not been subjected to any death threats from Trump supporters. An anonymous right-wing account went viral by posting third world problems require third world solutions on top of a video of the 2020 military coup in Myanmar. Somebody from Blaze Media called for Republican district attorneys to manipulate the courts and put Democrats in jail immediately. No excuses, no equivocation. Sean Davis, CEO of the right-wing publication The Federalist, posted that members of the right have a moral obligation to terrorize the left with its own rules and tactics until it is destroyed. Here, to me, is the interesting part of this article. It goes on to say that, probably nothing's going to happen. There may be a few isolated incidents that occur with some of these lone wolf people or, groups of 2 or 3 people committing violence, little sleeper cell kind of action. But mass mobilizations are hard and require work. There's usually a pattern that precedes them. MAGA faithful and the far right did not wake up on January 6th and show up in DC and decide to storm the Capitol. That was in January 6th of 2021. All of 2020, everything was shut down during COVID, and there were protests over that. During the whole summer of 2020 were the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests. So the logistics were already there. There had been multiple very large protests in Washington, D.C., specifically on the right in the months leading up to January 6th, 2021. And those protests showed members of the far right both that there were other people like them and that there were outlets to express how they felt. Like in November 2020 and in December 2020, there were these 2 million MAGA marches in DC when the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers showed up and tens of thousands of people showed up. And, they had a protest during the day, but then as soon as it got dark and the protest was, quote, over, these groups just spilled out into the street and were just beating the shit out of people, ripping down BLM signs. I think one of the things Enrique Tarrio was charged with, he was the leader of the Proud Boys. He tore down a BLM sign from a church and burned it, and he caught a vandalism trespassing charge. So it's like that logistical framework was already in place before January 6th, because they'd already been having really large protests in Washington, D.C. by conservatives for the better part of 8-9 months repeatedly. So it's like right-wing protesters established rough patterns for where they would congregate. The Hotel Harrington in downtown D.C. became a recurring hotspot for conservative out-of-towners. The bar on its first floor, Harry's, became a known hangout for the Proud Boys and anyone who wanted to mingle with them. Everything becomes easier when you're not the first one to tread the path. January 6th came after a buildup of social and civil unrest in the United States. People were already going to the streets and turning out for stuff that had been happening over and over and over and over again before January 6th. And I guess kind of the point is that's like, look at the last year. Donald Trump got first indicted, I think it was in March of last year of 2023. And he demanded that his supporters show up in Manhattan and have the biggest protest ever on the day that he had to go turn himself in and get booked. About 100 people showed up. He demanded the same thing when he got indicted in Washington, D.C. Almost nobody showed up. He demanded the same thing when he got indicted in Florida. Almost nobody showed up. In Florida, of all places. He got indicted in Georgia. He demanded turnout in Georgia. Nobody showed up. So it's like there wasn't this logistical framework of huge protests on the right over the course of the last year, leading up to day before yesterday when he got convicted. He got convicted of 34 felonies, and there were maybe 24 Trump supporters on hand in Manhattan near that courthouse. That's it. How many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people were in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021, after that year of logistical patterns had already been established over and over and over again? That framework doesn't exist now. And I don't think it's, I think the other kind of complicating factor for Trump supporters and for Trump himself in getting his supporters to respond to these kinds of things is looking at how many people were prosecuted for January 20th or January 6th, 2021. There have been over 2,000 people arrested. There have been over 800 people that have either been tried or pled guilty. There are 400 or 500 that got sentenced to prison. And these, the majority of these people were people who, basically were like people in their 40s and 50s who were married, had families, they owned homes, they had careers, they had multiple vehicles, they had a boat, they had an ATV. It's not some lunatic Jethro living in the middle of nowhere in a trailer with no life, no money. These people had lives, and their lives were destroyed because they believed Donald Trump's lies and went to the Capitol on January 6th. All of his supporters across the country have all followed those cases very, very closely. And they have seen that the FBI and the DOJ are not fucking around. And I think that that's had a significant chilling effect on the willingness of Trump supporters to show up and do things like they did on January 6th, especially over the course of the last year. While Donald Trump got indicted again, got indicted again, went on trial for E. Jean Carroll, went on trial with the AG in New York State, got $550 million in fines and penalties against him, went on trial with E. Jean Carroll a second time, now has $88 million in judgments against him for that, and now was on trial in a criminal case for 2 months and just got convicted of 34 felony counts. His supporters haven't showed up for any of those things because they know they'll get arrested and prosecuted. And now Donald Trump knows that he will get arrested and prosecuted as well and convicted on 34 felony counts, which I still feel giddy about. I'm still just absolutely giddy about that. All right, that wraps up this episode. I want to strongly encourage everyone to please visit hawkmerchstore.com. We've got a whole line of Pride merchandise that my brother and I put together with our buddy Wiseacre. And we are donating for the month of June. We're donating all the sales proceeds from those items to the Kaleidoscope Youth Center in Columbus, Ohio, that provides assistance, services, support of all kinds to LGBTQ youth in Central Ohio, in a red state. So we feel pretty strongly about that, and we hope you guys will consider buying some of that merch because we want to make a great big fat donation to them at the end of the month of June. Donald Trump got convicted. The system worked. 34 felonies. It's a brighter day in America. We have reason to feel encouragement. His poll numbers are already slipping with independents and swing voters. 15% of Republicans now want him to drop out of the race. That was a poll that released today. In that same poll, 49% of independents want him to drop out of the race. He can't win without independents. There's reason to feel good. There's reason to feel encouragement heading into the fall. All right? Everybody keep your chin up. We're surrounded by stupid people who are in a cult and want to get violent, but they don't have the balls to do it. There are more of us than them. So I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your weekend. Have a good Sunday. Thanks, as always, to my brother Falcon and my buddy Wiseacre and my brother from another mother, Anu, for letting us use his music. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.